Hi, everybody. I am exhausted. It's 10 a.m., but I had to make time for Sai, who is a representative of Women's Republic, and I'm very, very excited to have you because I've seen your Twitter feed. I follow you on Twitter, and I really, really enjoy that feed because it's refreshing to see. So a lot of the time, I'm getting into arguments about Islam and different political stances, and it's just checking out memes as you do,
Of
but
course.
for the most part, it's not very common for me to see positive stuff, and you post a lot of positive stuff on my feed, and a lot of stuff that makes me think. Like you did a couple of posts about Gandhi recently, and we'll get into that later. But I have Sai, and I would like her to introduce herself and what she does. First of all, before we get into any discussions about any topics. So, how are you, and what do you do?
Hi, I'm great. Super excited to be here. So thank you. This is going to be really fun. I'm very excited. So my name is Sai, and I've grown up both in Canada and the United States. I was originally born in India, but I've pretty much spent most of my life in North America. I graduated with a degree in political science from Arizona State University. And while I was in university, I started doing a lot of writing. So I published a lot of articles on different websites like the Odyssey, Elite Daily, Thought Catalog, and so on. And then at the same time, I started to kind of educate myself and learn more on feminism, women's empowerment, those kinds of topics. And when I started talking about that a lot on my social media, I eventually was like, you know what, let's combine my writing, let's combine the things that I'm very passionate about and put it together. So I actually started a small magazine called Women's Republic. So our idea with Women's Republic is kind of like it's a platform for mainly women. We also have some male writers, but mainly anyone that identifies themselves as a woman, to have a platform for them to speak about what they think is important to discuss, what they think are, issues that we face, and how we can educate each other, learn from each other, and empower one another.
Okay, that sounds wonderful. I haven't been in the writing sphere for such a long time. Otherwise, I would offer. But
you're always welcome to if you decide to get back to it.
Oh, thank you. I'll have to start practicing again. Well, I normally do fictional pieces and I do like poetry and stuff. I don't normally write articles because it's easier for me to create my own world than live in the one that we currently do. But thank you for that introduction. And I just want to say that anybody who wants to share this and have people join, you're more than welcome to do that. So before we dive into any topics, I've always asked every single person that I've brought onto the live streams to tell me how they're doing in isolation. We are on day 86 here in the UK, for myself anyway. So we've been in isolation and lockdown for about 80 to 90 days. How are you doing? Because you're currently in India at the moment.
Yeah, so I had come out here to visit extended family, and it was kind of a longer trip than usual. And what happened was we ended up getting stuck here when they shut down the entire country. So that was back in March. So I've been here for a while now, kind of just at this point, they've opened up everything else except international flights. So waiting on it, but it's been interesting. It's like, I would say some days are good. Like, I'm like, it's not the worst thing in the world. I get to keep myself busy in different ways. Like I have time for myself. And then other days I wake up and I'm like, this is the worst. I want to be home. I want this to be over.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's a back and forth thing every day.
It sounds like a bit of a roller coaster.
Yeah, I guess the only thing that's kind of keeping me sane is I keep reminding myself, I'm like, at least I'm safe. At least I'm in one place. I don't have to go out and risk myself every day for work or anything of that sort. So I guess I'm very privileged in that sense. And that's just something I have to be grateful for.
Yeah. And you also have, you still have work going on, which is always good to have some kind of structure, even though your structure is messy because you still working on Canada time in India.
Yeah.
So it's all over the place. And I think that they're like 10 hours apart, aren't they?
9.5, yeah.
9.5, yeah, that sounds about right. Because I know, because my family in Bangladesh, they have about 5.5 hours or so. time between us and the UK, and you guys are even further out. So it must be difficult. But it's good to hear that you're doing well and you're keeping as busy as you can, and things are going well. So CMB are running Shunning is Abuse, Shunning is Torture, and Life After Shunning campaign throughout the year. And every single one of my guests has been asked about their personal experiences with shunning, or what they know about shunning, or what they can tell us about shunning. And since your sphere is working with women and female struggles, I would like to, put that to you. Like, what do you think about that topic, and what can you share about it? Since you do have this experience with working within the feminism sphere and fighting for feminism.
Yeah, I think it's something that we see a lot, especially in like South Asian culture, with the way women are treated. It's kind of like there's this concept or notion with a lot of families that it's like, my daughter or my sister or granddaughter, they have to listen to me. They have to behave the way I want, marry who I want, live their life the way I want, or else like get out, like we're done with you. And I think it's improved for sure from like maybe a couple decades ago, but I think it's still a problem. And I guess one of the, like, in general, it's a terrible concept. It's a terrible kind of culture that we unfortunately still face. But I personally, with a lot of the kinds of things that I work with women's rights and feminism, I'd say it also highlights our need to like make sure that women are educated properly from a young age, not just so that they can kind of see these red flags and kind of be aware of what's happening to them with this kind of abuse, but also in the sense that because it's become so it is so prevalent that this happens, we want them to be financially stable. We want them to not ever have to depend on anyone else. So I think that's very important.
Yeah, I think that financial independence, and it's unfortunate because a lot of girls, especially in the Indian subcontinent, I feel like they're not given that option sometimes to go and find work or have an education. But having financial independence is such a big thing, to be self-sufficient and be able to go out and do things for yourself. And so many girls within that subcontinent are either just sort of primed for marriage and having kids, and that's meant to be the priority. And as you said, there is a slow shift away from that. But would you say that it's going as quickly as you would like, or is it quite slow? Because from the villages that I've seen, and obviously I'm not from India, but I am from Bangladesh. Within the villages, the mentality is very much still like, your priority is to have kids and be married. But in the cities, I do see a shift. So what is your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely don't think it's going as quickly as it should be. And I agree. I think the thing with that is we kind of see a few major, we see people who are more influential talking about these things. We see a few major changes in the bigger cities, and we're like, okay, cool, work over. But just because we see a few people kind of, moving away from these harmful culture and traditions doesn't mean that that's necessarily it's not spreading as much as we want it to. So there's still a lot of work to be done there. And it's going to be a while to get there before, we can ensure that all women kind of have more freedom and aren't victims of these kinds of issues, but it's going to take time.
Yeah. I also wanted to ask, what do you think, why do you think we've kind of held on, I say we, but the subcontinent and people from the subcontinent, why do you think that they've kind of held on to these kinds of traditions where it's very patriarchal and it's not very fair to women?
Yeah, I think the first thing is, when we think about the idea of a tradition, people are they get stuck in a place where they're like, every tradition is a good thing. We have to keep traditions going. And that's not a good way of looking at it, because traditions should constantly be changing. They should be changing to fit what year we live in, what kind of a society we live in, and make sure that it's not harmful for anyone. So I think that's one part of it. And the second part is just that, we have even women in these societies, we have this internalized misogyny that tells us we need to keep this kind of like culture going. This is what we need to do. And we don't even realize ourselves that it's harmful. So that's how it ends up kind of it keeps going on to the next generation.
Yeah, this is what I found actually, because my family's quite conservative in the way that they practice, and it's kind of been made worse by their sort of strict adherence to a conservative form of Islam. But there always seemed to be this like bitterness about like me or one of my cousins having some sort of freedom or having an education, and it seems like this bitterness that carries through, that if I didn't get an education, then why does she get to have an education? And for a long time I still don't quite understand it, because you would think that if somebody's had time, you would want better for the people who come after you, but it just seemed like the selfish need to project all things that have happened to you onto somebody else. Could you speak to that a little? Like, is that something that you've experienced? Because it was something that I'm still kind of working through, as something that has gone on in my life pretty much since I was a child.
Yeah, I would say I'm lucky that I haven't experienced it myself, but I know what you're talking about because I've seen it. And actually another kind of similar thing that I've actually written about before is it's not just education, but you see the same thing in when, like South Asian women or like older generations, they're married into families where they don't have any freedom, where they're kind of forced to listen to anything their husband says, their in-laws, they're in abusive relationships a lot. And at that point, they're like, they're stuck in it. They know it's like the situation they're in is bad, but they can't get out of it. And then by the time they have kids and they have sons and they have daughter-in-laws that come into the families, they end up doing the same thing. And it's kind of the same concept where they're like, well, this is how my mother-in-law treated me. Isn't it what I should be doing as well? Or I deserve to kind of have that same power. So I think it's definitely seen in like a lot of different areas of the culture. And it's not fair. It's something that we need to work on. And I was just, I was saying this to someone on Twitter yesterday. I was like, when you see that kind of internalized misogyny, it's like, it's so hard because on one hand, you are so angry by it. You are so frustrated and you're like, I hate this person. I just wish I could knock some sense into them. But at the same time, we do have to like also keep in mind that you can't entirely blame them because it's just a cycle that they're stuck in that they don't know how to get out of either.
Yeah, it's quite unfortunate because they do feel trapped. They feel trapped in the cycle, and because they're trapped, they feel like they have to perpetuate it, which is unfortunate. But I do want to ask, so for example, when I was a child, this whole concept of marriage was like this magical place where you could have anything that you wanted. Like I would ask for a dog, and my mom would be like, "Oh no, you can't have any pets. When you get married, you can have a pet." And it was just like, "Oh, okay. So the goal is to be married, and then I can do whatever I want." And it, like as a child, it's a very simple connection that you make. You don't necessarily understand what marriage is, but you know that it's a means by which you can get what you want. And I think that a lot of people within our communities have that kind of mentality where they direct young girls towards that goal. Like it's not necessarily like they try to trump up marriage as the thing that they should aspire to, but they make it a catalyst for their own freedom. What do you think about that as a concept of parents and families, sort of molding their young women into thinking that way, and how do we change it also?
Yeah, I think I know exactly what you're talking about. I think it's very harmful because what you kind of do at that point is you have your daughters or your girls become dependent on someone, and you also give them this idea that, just like you said, like it's a magical place. Like you think everything will be fixed when when you have a husband. And I think when that happens, that also kind of leads to a lot of situations where women end up settling for abusive relationships because they're like, well, I was told that this is this glamorous thing. Like, I just have to keep working on it. I need to stay in it. So I think it's very like dangerous in that way. And really the only way that we can change that is so much of like everything that we learn and like everything that kind of ends up being our influences comes from when we're younger. So when our girls are younger, we shouldn't be like, you can do this when you're married. You should be like, you should aspire to be independent so that like you can do this on your own. For instance, I see a lot of like posts where people are like, well, my parents said I can travel wherever I want with my husband. And it's like, no, you should say that your daughter should be educated and financially stable enough to be able to travel wherever she wants, whenever she wants to. Like, it shouldn't be dependent on someone else.
Yeah.
So I think it's really kind of reinforcing that from a younger age and not like, oh, you can do this when you have a husband.
Yeah, I think that sometimes these kinds of ideas are also very male centric, that, you know, I can travel with my husband. And I think that that actually prevents travel being a safe thing for women to do on their own.
Exactly.
Because if they don't have a man with them when they're traveling alone, it's like, what protection does she have, sort of thing. So I don't know. I think that that kind of a change is going to be a very slow one, unfortunately, especially within our own communities. Because being completely honest with you, I would not go to India alone. It's just not something that I would do. I would be very wary of doing that by myself. If it were somewhere in Europe or somewhere slightly more developed, not to be problematic, but slightly more developed, I would have less of a problem with it. But because of the culture of the society and the men that exist in those countries, I would be more afraid of traveling alone in a place like India or Bangladesh, just because of the narrative that they have of women there. I also, please feel free to correct me if I'm wrong, but that's how I feel within myself. But I also want to address how we change so how do we break this cycle that the older generation seem to have for their young women and for their daughters? Because I do think, to an extent, like, we can shape and educate the younger generation as much as we want, but ultimately they go home to their elders. So how do we change and break the cycle that the elders have of the narrative they want for their young women?
I think the main thing with that, and this is something that even I struggle with, is we have to remind ourselves how patient we have to be when trying to change someone who's older. Like, it is not something that we're going to be able to do in one day. But some people, we might not even ever be able to do it, but, you know, we still have to try. But it's a slow process. It's something that you have to keep working on. And I think the way that we do that is we show them or speak to them about real examples of how these traditions, this culture has affected people and harmed people. So just just giving them an overall idea, like, hey, this is bad, isn't going to cut it. We have to be like, this happened as a result of this patriarchal tradition you have. This happened as a result of this kind of rape culture we have. Like, we need to keep drilling it into them that bad things are happening right now. They keep happening. And unless we all start changing our mindsets, those things will not, like, those crime rates will not go down. It will not get better.
Do you also think that the older generation carry a lot of emotional scars about their own journeys, and then, like I said, they do project a lot of that onto younger women within their families? But for example, I had an aunt who, you know, she wanted to have an education, and she left the family to go live by herself and have this education, but she kind of came back after a few years because she wanted to get married with her father's blessing, and then she, like, abandoned everything, and she kind of just sort of submitted to that, to back into the cycle. But when I kind of wanted the same thing, where I wanted to leave the family and stuff, she completely abandoned me and did not support me in the slightest. So, and she was probably one of the most vigilant about saying, you know, you're going to be back and you're going to regret everything that you've done. How do we, in a manner of speaking, dig into those emotional scars and try to heal them? Because I do think that it's a much deeper problem than simply, oh, they're just, you know, mindless bots that are just cycling the whole thing over and over again.
Yeah, I think one of the worst things that we as a society have done to older people and even people in our generation is tell them that like you should be bottling up your feelings, that therapy is bad. Like, I think that is really one of the biggest issues, is like, especially when we stigmatize it, it's like they never talk about it. And the first step to healing is to speak on those things. So I think we need to normalize that more. Like, even if we're at the point where our older relatives or older generations won't necessarily go see a therapist, we at least have to be there for them and like try to get them to open up and speak on that. And I think the other kind of issue there is a lot of these, like the older women in our families, they were also, you know, in for their own way and in their own time, they were also positive that they could make some kind of a change, that they could be the ones that were different. And when that didn't necessarily work out, I think that kind of ends up giving them a pessimistic outlook. Just like, you know, how your aunt was like, you're definitely going to come back, like this isn't going to work out. I think there's that pessimistic outlook, and it's all kind of showing them that it doesn't always turn out negative. Like, you have to be that positive example to show them that there is someone who's going to be making change.
Doing my best.
Yeah, I mean, that's all we can do, right? Like showing them that, showing them we, you know, if we all work together, like we'll do better. I think that's what they don't really believe in right now. They don't believe that we can actually change things, and we have to work towards like at least show them like small wins and small examples of how we are changing things, so that they are also more convinced to become a part of the solution.
Yeah, and I agree. I don't know. I carry a lot of anger with my family, I think. And I'm not saying that that's the healthiest way to deal with it, but it's where I'm at emotionally with them right now. And I don't want to give up on them, but they make it so hard to believe in them.
Baby steps. Baby
steps. But what I did also want to talk about, so one of the reasons why, like, I do believe in equal rights for women, and I feel like this might be a contentious issue for the two of us to get into. I do believe in equal rights for women, and I fight for women's rights. I talk a lot about women's rights, a lot, but I don't take the feminism label. And I think one of the reasons why I don't adhere to that label is because of a lot of examples of third wave Western feminism that I don't necessarily agree with. And I don't want to be associated with. What is your take? And I'm happy to you know, platform any kind of opinion that you have, so you don't have to worry about it. But what is your opinion of Western feminism as opposed to feminism that I feel is more needed in the East, with Saudi Arabia, with Iran, with India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Africa? How can you compare the two, and also what flaws do you see in the movement?
Yeah, you know, as much as I like call myself a feminist, I also understand why you don't necessarily like that label. And I think over the years there has been a lot of, I think the main issue is, you know, like in the United States, in the UK, what is highlighted in the media is much more of the like mainstream white feminism, which, you know, makes us think like this isn't really helping a lot of people. Like, this is not focused on the right priorities. And I think that's why a lot of people want to kind of try and stay away from the label. My personal take on that, though, is while I agree with that, I think the way we approach that should be different. We shouldn't be trying to stay away from the label, but rather we should be trying to reclaim it. Yeah, we should be trying to reclaim it and change it in the way that, you know, is helpful for everyone and not just one group of people. So for me, when I started Women's Republic and kind of just throughout anything that I do with feminism, I go back to this quote from Audre Lorde, which was like, I'm not free until any woman is free, even if her shackles are very different from my own. And I think that's really kind of, and, you know, that kind of goes back to the idea of intersectionality. And I think that's where we should try to focus our efforts. It's like, honestly, like in many ways, I am very privileged. Like, I have had a lot of privilege growing up and now, and even just the fact that I have a big platform to speak on is more than a lot of people can say. So it's like, I need to not be looking at what else, like I shouldn't just be looking at what else I can do for myself, but like you said, like for the women in different countries, for the women who don't have the same voice. So yeah, I mean, I think that's the thing. Like we need to kind of reevaluate, like what are our priorities? How are we including everyone in it? And work towards changing what feminism means rather than trying to,
Disassociate.
take ourselves, disassociate, exactly.
Yeah, okay. So I don't know too much about feminism because again I grew up very, very conservative. I grew up with the mentality that, you know, women are subordinate to men, and that is something that I've left behind, and I'm still trying to heal from. And I'm trying to sort a lot of things in my own brain. I don't keep up with the world sometimes. I just disappear from that sphere from time to time. So intersectionality and intersectionals are like words that I've seen a lot, but I don't fully understand what it means. So can you give us a definition of what that is and also how it's applied?
Yeah. I think this is one of those things that can, like, the definition could also kind of vary depending on who's looking at it. But the way I see it is like with intersectionality, it is, on one hand, we are looking at our rights as women, but then we also have to look at how does religion play into that? How does race play into it? How does disability, how does sexuality play into it? So intersectionality is the idea that we are taking all of those different concepts, all of those different like parts of our lives into account, and making sure that when we say we're fighting for women or we're fighting for equal rights, we're not abandoning a group of people. Like we're making sure that our like fight includes women with disabilities. We're including women of different races and different religions and so on. So that's the way that I look at it.
Right. Okay. That makes more sense to me than just because the gripe that I've had here in the West with feminism has mainly been about the smaller kind of complaints that a lot of white feminists have. So if like I used to watch a lot of BuzzFeed back in the day, and they do a lot of takes about like manspreading and microaggressions, which is all well and good. Like if you have the time to complain about that, it means your society has progressed to a point that you can have small complaints. But I never saw them bringing up minority issues that I felt like needed to be addressed, and I didn't know exactly why. I think to an extent it's this fear of offending minorities and then losing that audience. But I also think that it's very, very important to talk about, and we'll also get into that discussion about racism within minority communities, because I think that that's a really important thing to touch on as well. So like whenever I talked about, you know, all of the things that I've been through with, you know, arranged marriage, forced marriage, domestic violence, FGM, stuff like that, it kind of fell under the rug of, oh, you know, that's just your culture kind of thing. What do you think about that, and how do we change the narrative to make people understand that just because it's someone's culture doesn't necessarily mean you can't call it out?
Yeah, I think a lot of that really at the beginning of it comes with trying to educate those people, because a lot of these, I know exactly what you mean. I remember I had tweeted in response to like BuzzFeed, or I don't remember where, but it was a post about like a woman trying to talk about menstruation by putting period blood all over her face.
Yeah.
And I was like, there are a lot of issues that we need to be talking about when it comes to menstruation, when it comes to, like period taxes and so on. But posting a picture on your Instagram, just doing that with period blood on your face does not help. Like, are you putting educational resources with it? Are you starting a conversation? Like, those are the kind of things that we definitely need more of. And I think if the way that I'm looking at it, at least, is I am learning every day. There is so much that I have to continuously learn and unlearn. But it's like, if we can't trust other people to be starting those conversations, we should at least be trying to start them ourselves if we have the voice and the privilege to, and then help speak with people, talk to people to the point where they're kind of more interested in actually going and looking at those things themselves. And then they're like, oh wait, this isn't just culture. Like, this is an issue. Like, this is something we need to be talking about. This is a lot worse, a lot more dangerous than I thought. So
right.
And it's not easy. I'm not saying it's easy at all. It will take hundreds of tries, hundreds of people getting mad at you. And like, again, a lot of it is just, I can say this myself. There's been so many times where like even my own thoughts or opinions have been wrong and I've been called out for it. And like, you have to also be willing to educate yourself and change your opinions.
I think we do need to normalize saying, you know, I don't know, or please tell me something. I think that in this climate where everybody has a voice, everyone has a phone in their pocket, I think it's very, very easy to get sucked into the I know everything and you have to listen to me kind of mentality. But ultimately, everything is a learning curve. I mean, if you admit ignorance on something, it's not something to be ashamed of. It's just that you didn't know, and you can't be wrong if you don't know something, you know. So it shouldn't be something that people are ashamed by. But unfortunately, we're in a climate where that is something to be ashamed of. So two kind of contentious issues that I found with when I talk to feminists about different issues is one is about trans rights and how, because I've seen this kind of disagreement between the trans rights camp and the women's rights camp, and also sex work as well. I've seen kind of the camp sort of split on that as well. So what are your views on trans rights? How do you view them? And are there any, why is there this contention with those two camps?
Well, right now, I'm sure you've probably looked at J.K. Rowling's posts.
Yes.
So I will be honest, like it's especially been very interesting for me this Pride Month. I'm like learning more about the LGBTQ community, like doing more reading myself. But one thing I've like never really understood is I think it comes from, like, you're asking like why it's kind of an issue. I think it comes from this idea that, you know, like cis women are kind of, they feel like their spot will be taken away or their importance will be taken away if we include transgender women into that discussion. And I don't understand it at all, because I think there's enough room in this fight. There's enough room in the world for us to be fighting for the rights of all different kinds of women. Like, it doesn't have to be one, like, sexuality, one gender, one religion. I think we can fight for everyone. And two, I also don't think it makes sense for, you know, when women are like trying to exclude transgender women, I don't think it makes sense to say, well, they don't experience periods, they're different from us, they don't understand our issues. Because even if 2 women or 5 women all menstruate, that doesn't mean we all experience the same issues. Like, at the end of the day, every single one of us as individuals experience different issues, and every single one of us will face oppression and, you know, danger in different ways. So I don't understand how that's
I don't quite like how all of the arguments kind of devolve back into periods, because there are women who don't have periods either.
That's exactly what I said like 2 days ago.
Yeah, it's a little crazy to me. But I guess the argument that I've heard, and it has to do a lot with so the calculation of privilege, and how so T women or trans women are obviously they're born with a certain level of male privilege, and then they transition into becoming women, which they are. And does that change their, I don't know, their social I don't get it. Their social standing within like the privilege dynamic. I don't know what I'm talking about.
No, I get what you mean.
Many buzzwords.
I get what you mean. I think if anything, transgender women face less privilege and more oppression than like cis women do. Like,
that's what I would have said as well.
Yeah, like, because you're facing, you're like kind of being outcasted by men, and at the same time you also have these like trans exclusionary feminist women who are also trying to outcast you. So if anything, like, they face much less privilege than us, and that again goes back to this idea, like, why are we not fighting for the women who are less privileged and more oppressed than we are, or at least trying to, you know? Like, I'm not saying everyone is 100% educated on everything, but we should be trying.
Yeah. So within the, I don't know if TERF is a slur, but I'm going to use it.
I don't think it is. I would not call it a slur.
Okay. Well, within the TERF camp, they also hold this idea that sex work can never be, you know, feminist in a sense, because when a woman gives up her body, it's not something that she does willingly in any case at all. What is your take on sex work? Because my current view, and I would like to say that a lot of my views sometimes are a little uninformed, but my current view on sex work and how I think about it is that if a woman wants to sell her body and make her money that way, I have no problem with it. I think that ultimately everyone has their own hustle, and if that's something she enjoys and something that she wants to invest in, then I do not have a personal problem with it. And I would prefer if, it was more governmentally regulated so that it was safer for women to do that. So what is your take on sex work and how you view it?
Yeah, I mean, again, like I will also kind of be honest in the sense that I'm not completely educated on sex work. It's not an area that I know a lot about, but like my opinion from what I have seen and learned over the years is if someone else is a sex worker, it doesn't hurt me. Like it's not something that I need to be offended about or be upset about. And if anything, because, like I don't get hurt from it. I don't gain anything from putting them down. If anything, if I'm actually trying to fight for people, we should, like you said, we should be working towards making it safer and, less harmful for those women who are in those positions rather than, being more of their issues and putting them down even more.
Yeah. I mean, I have a lot of, I lean a lot into quite libertarian views, and I believe that you're given one body and you're entitled to do whatever you want with that body. And if you want to sell it for sex or for pleasure, depending on, I personally, I envy a lot of women who can do that, because that seems like, I mean, maybe again, it's uninformed, but it just seems like an easy thing to do. To just, focus on your body and make that your priority. It must involve a lot of self-care as well. And I don't know, it just, I think that when you limit what people can do with their own selves, it makes it very difficult for them to do anything in the world. As someone who like dyes their own hair, tattoos their own body, I know a lot of people who would be like, that's a form of self-harm. Like, you're not taking care of yourself. Yeah. But ultimately, if it is something that I enjoy and it's something that I want on my body, I don't find it within someone else's rights to tell me what I can do with it. And I kind of apply that same logic to sex work. Does that make sense?
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, if it's also like, I guess I'm steering away from the topic a little, but it's like, if you're saying that someone isn't able to, do what they want as in terms of profession with their body, the next thing you know is it's going to end up in the conversation where it goes to abortion rights. And then people are like, you also can't decide what to do with your body then. So you can fall into a like hole very dangerously. And I'm like, I agree with you on that.
Yeah. Well, we can talk about abortion rights a little bit, actually, because I mean, I'm pro-choice. That's obvious, but I have always sort of had this different, like, I don't know when the stopping point is for me. For a while, I thought that about 6 months was where my stopping point was, because in my view, if the baby could live outside the body, then I would consider that a life. And there are different kinds of feminists that will say things like, oh, up until the baby is born, you're allowed to abort that baby, or you should be allowed to abort that baby, because it is still part of the woman's body. I heard some crazy stuff a couple of days ago about, I don't know who it was. I can't remember. I wasn't paying that much attention, but she had said that it should be up to 3 years. And it's yeah, exactly. Like that's not your body anymore. But what is your take?
I think that's called murder.
It is murder. It is murder, because that is not your body anymore. But what is your take on abortion, and also what do you think about like the limits, or where up until what point abortion should be allowed in a manner of speaking?
Well, I definitely don't think 3 years is the way to go.
No, that's a ridiculous argument.
Yeah, no, I'm definitely pro-choice. It's just when it comes to that, like, what is the limit? That's where I'm kind of conflicted, because I feel like that isn't something that you are really informed enough about to have an opinion unless you're put in that situation. Like, we don't necessarily know what kind of like ideas or thoughts are going into someone's head when like they're put in that position. So it's very hard. Like, I think I don't know that there's a right answer for it. And like that is me being a little uninformed, because I know there's the medical side of like, what is the limit, what isn't. But just like speaking from like an opinion perspective, I think we can't really put a limit on it, just because there's so many different factors that play into a decision like that.
Yeah, and I think a point I've made quite a few times is that with the few obvious crazy exceptions, no one enjoys going through an abortion.
Exactly.
Like, it's not an easy decision. It's not something you do for pleasure. You know, you don't just go on a cruise and have an abortion. That's not how it works. And I think that there's a case to be made for pregnancies individually. So I feel very uncomfortable putting a limit on it. I used to adhere to 6 months until somebody kind of convinced me that 24 weeks was better, so slightly over 6 months, because a lot of women don't show that they're pregnant, or sometimes they don't even know that they're pregnant up until that point. Also, like, up until 24 months is when you finally see brainwaves in the baby or in the fetus. Which is like scientifically, if you are going to kill someone who is brain dead, is when their brainwaves stop showing up. So that is what scientifically death is considered to be. So up until the brainwaves show up, technically that fetus is not alive. But like, all of those arguments are kind of null and void when you take into consideration that the woman who is carrying that fetus and either wants or does not want, it's probably very, very subjective in her mind as to what she would want to do. I mean, I've never been pregnant. It's not something that I could really speak to, and I feel a little like, while I've seen many pregnancies, because I'm the oldest of 6 siblings, I do think it's a very difficult topic, and it shouldn't be a sort of black and white. It's very gray as an issue. But thank you for talking to me about all these feminism things, because sometimes I feel very scared about asking these things, like on a platform like Twitter, where anyone can call you an idiot. So it's nice to have like a feminist in the room who can sort of deconstruct all of these ideas.
It's funny though, because people think I like know so much, and I'm still learning myself.
Well, that's I think that that's a good place to be in, though. That if you acknowledge that you don't have all of the information, but there is some knowledge that you can carry forward, I think that's a good place to be in, because you kind of leave room open for the gaining of knowledge as well.
Exactly.
So I wanted to talk about sort of feminism and its clash with religion a little bit, and then following that, I also want to cover BLM, because you've been quite vocal on that aspect as well. So in the past, with white feminism, we've seen like the bra burning generation and things like that. They've come to blows with Christianity a lot with white feminism. We kind of see the opposite with feminism and Islam. I think that there's this weird kind of friendship, like strange bedfellows kind of relationship with Islam and feminism. What can you, obviously you don't come from a Muslim background, so you don't have to comment on it if you don't want to, but what do you think about that? Like, we see a lot of feminists like toting the hijab as a symbol of like women's liberation and things like that. So what can you tell us about that, and what are your opinions on that, if you have any?
Yeah, to be honest, I'm not super like informed on religion, nor am I very religious myself, so like I couldn't really speak to it a lot. But like, I think the only thing that I can say to that is, I have seen with every religion, I have seen instances where like not the religion itself, but the interpretation by people of the religion, or just the concept of a faith itself, is kind of often used to try and keep women submissive, or keep women from, being independent. And I think that's something that we need to work on. But again, like I said, it's kind of a weird place, because I don't think it's religion itself that's doing that, but it's culture in the name of religion, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, I've spoken quite a bit on like the tenets that exist in Islam, and to a point, I think that you can't really blame a set of beliefs for what it is because it was constructed in a time. There's a lot of context around it, and obviously the way that different religious believers practice their religion is extremely diverse. It's not monolithic. What I would say is that there are some, throughout different kinds of religions, there are tenets and rulings that are kind of they're kind of used in that way, and they kind of enable a misogynistic society, and it's just not very fun and helpful. But aside from that, I do want to move into the BLM discussion. I want to move into Black Lives Matter, and I do find that a lot of people within my own circle do not like that I've aligned myself to the movement. I'm not entirely sure why, and I'm not going to make assumptions. But they do not necessarily like that I've turned into that kind of into that movement. So tell us a little bit about your involvement in the movement, why you support it, and what you would say were your biggest reasons for thinking that it's an important movement to align to.
Yeah, I've honestly been feeling very kind of helpless in a way because being stuck, halfway across the world from home, I really wish I was back home right now so that I could be attending protests, trying to like actually make a change in person. So it's been like very hard to not be able to do that. So what I've been trying to do is boosting up resources, sharing, retweeting, those kinds of things as much as I can. And I think the reason for that, like, one, obviously, like, it's something that we should all be aligned with. Like, racism is a very, it's a big issue. And like, I think you could probably agree with me on this, is that I think people are also very quick to, like, in the United States, people will be very quick to say racism is only an issue in the South. In North America, Canadians will be quick to say it's only an American issue. And the same thing with
in the UK, it's only an American issue,
Yeah, and I don't think that's right to say because it's something that we face in all of these countries. So I think it's something that we should all be working on. But more so than that, I think like we as allies and as like South Asian allies have a responsibility to put in even more work and like learn and unlearn ourselves, because all of us, no matter how much we want to like deny it, we've all been guilty of being anti-Black just because of the way that our cultures of race does, just because of like what we've learned from our families, from our movies or societies. Like, I know this is the most like common, example, but even just take the concept of a fairness cream and you have it all over South Asia. Done. Like, you don't even need to add in any other example. Even just that just shows you. So I think because of that, we are all very guilty of it. And that's why like it's high time. It's high time that we start trying to change and like educate ourselves. And I also think it shouldn't just be this past week or the next few weeks and then we get over it, but it's something that we need to continue. We need to make that like educating ourselves and being allies like a part of our daily lives.
Yeah, so a couple of things. So with the anti-Blackness, I think that it definitely does exist within our Desi culture, and that's really what I can talk about. I've been fortunate enough that living in the UK and living in a multicultural society, I haven't faced a lot of racism, but I was raised with a lot of racism. My parents are both first-generation immigrants. I'm also a first-generation immigrant. And like they've kind of brought that mentality into like a multicultural society, which and also I don't necessarily understand fully where the anti-Blackness or the racism comes from, but what I do know is that I can only speak for Bangladeshis, but Bangladeshis are very proud of, where, not just Bangladesh, but also where they're from in Bangladesh. So it becomes like, it doesn't just become like a race issue, it also becomes like a tribe kind of issue. Like, I'm from this city, this is the best city in Bangladesh, I don't respect anybody who's not from this city. So when they come into, like, for example, when my grandmother was here from Bangladesh, she would say things sort of offhandedly without really thinking, because she's an old lady and she's never seen Black people in her life. And she would say things like, oh, they all look the say. And she would say it very casually, but without realizing that that is something that is very, very offensive and not okay to say. And, you know, I would try to tell her that it's not okay to say, but at the same time, I did have that understanding that she has never seen a Black person in her life. So how do you think we can sort of educate our own people in this way? And also, how do we address it without also seeming like we're trying to attack an entire community? Because I've been struggling about talking about it for a very, very long time. Because I don't want to see, you know, I don't want to be seen as somebody who doesn't respect my own community, who doesn't acknowledge where I've come from. But at the same time, there are these existing problems that just nobody is talking about. So how do we address this in a way that it would be understood?
I'm going to pause you for 1 second and get my charger. I'm going to plug in my laptop real quick.
Yeah.
Then we will chat.
Yeah. No worries. If anyone has any questions, please feel free to ask. We will be taking questions after we've finished talking about the BLM discussion from the audience. So yeah, anyway, continue if you're ready.
So I've seen some really good resources in the past like few weeks about like how to speak with like older people in our communities, and I think they've been really helpful. I really recommend that everyone goes and like looks those up. I think it kind of goes back to kind of the same conversation we had again about like how do we talk to them about unlearning patriarchal values, is that it's not going to happen right away. It's going to be a slow process, but we have to show them like real life examples of what's happening. Like it's very easy and quick to say like, oh, police brutality against Black people is an issue. And they'll be like, what are you talking about? Like, that doesn't make sense. Like we have to go deeper into it. And when you do have that initial like hesitation from them or questions that throw you off, you have to stay patient and remind yourself that like you need to keep trying and you need to have answers to their questions. If you don't have them, like you go back and learn yourself first and then answer them. I think that's the way. If we keep that conversation going, that's where we kind of like are able to start that. And like everything else, like it's going to be a complicated process. And I also like, I do firmly believe that at the end of the day, with some people, no matter how hard you try, like they just will not be able to steer away from their beliefs. But it like there's different levels of like open-mindedness, but like we still have to do our part to try and change it. Yeah.
I do think to an extent, though, there is a communication barrier between the younger generations and the older generations. Because if you try to, I think that if you contradict the older generation, it's almost seen like a disrespect thing. Because there have been so many instances that I've heard of personally, and also I've seen from others, is that if they try to correct somebody that's older than them, it's seen as disrespectful, even though that might not be how you're trying to do it. So how do we go around that? Because I think that's, I mean, within my family, that's something that I got really, really good at, is going around issues rather than, you know, directing it. So instead of like saying directly that you're wrong, I would rather just ask like questions. I would just question them on certain things and just be like, and also play dumb a lot. So, for example, a friend of mine, we were talking yesterday, and he was saying that, like my mom, she's very, very vocal about BLM. Like she supports it, and you know, when I showed her the video of George Floyd being choked, she was very upset about it, and she understood it. But this is the same woman who won't allow me to marry a Black girl. So how do we kind of challenge that narrative without being sort of seen as disrespectful?
Yeah, I think just like you said, you kind of have to go around it. I guess the way that I would kind of look at it is, the main thing is you have to, as much as like this can be hard, you have to change your tone when you speak to them. Like it shouldn't be like you're trying to like confront them or you're trying to like educate them, but rather you yourself have to come off as someone who's like just trying to have like a casual conversation. And then like through that, you have to get them comfortable into speaking about it. And I'm like very glad that you touched on like how your mother's supportive, but then like you see how like it's different with you itself. I think that is like the most important thing to get through to them, is like, if we're going to be making a difference, if we're going to be, if we're going to be allies, we need to change that in our everyday life first, before anything else. So I think that's kind of the place where we start. And if we're able to help them unlearn that, I think a lot of the rest of it just comes naturally.
Yeah, I agree. I think that it's definitely not going to be an easy conversation to have with your elders, because they've had this culture passed down to them, and then they're sort of very, and also because they're minorities in places like the West, they don't want to lose their identity. Someone's screaming in the background.
Oh, I think it's birds outside.
Okay. I was just hoping it wasn't a person. Something else that I wanted to ask is that I've had a lot of conversations on all kind of sides of this argument about the Black Lives Matter movement, about the burning of buildings and businesses and all that kind of stuff. And I think the one question that is stuck in my mind is, what is the ultimate goal of Black Lives Matter? And I don't know if the goal of Black Lives Matter is to like change racism on an individual level, because I think that to an extent people will always have their prejudices. I'm very pessimistic in that way, and I don't think that you can change people's hearts and minds like that. But what I do think the movement can achieve, if they focus on it, is that they can change policy, in that have a zero tolerance for police brutality, and have just be able to treat people equally within the justice system. So what do you think the ultimate motives are for the movement, and do you see them being fulfilled?
Yeah, again, like, this is my speculation. Like, I think it's very hard to actually pinpoint what the hopeful result is, because there's just so much. But I would say, like, the way that I would look at it is definitely like policies and how the government runs. Definitely more accountability towards police is one thing. Like, if we're able to get all like police departments like abolished, that will be great. But like, it doesn't just stop there. Like, you will still have people who are racist on like an individual basis. So it's like, how do you also hold them accountable next is like a big thing. And then I think another part of it is like, how are we ensuring that there is actual equality and actual access to opportunities in workplaces and in schools? Because there's this whole, I think this is another thing where like people, like older generations, don't understand, where they're like, well, slavery was abolished, everything is good, right? But it's like, no, as much as it was abolished, like that equality, like in the white person's eyes, has like, it's never, they still don't see people as equal. So like, we need to make sure there is that like equal opportunity and equal safety, equal protection.
Yeah. I do want to ask you a little bit more about the abolishing like police departments, because I don't necessarily agree with that. But also I would like to understand where your argument for that is from. So can you talk to us a little bit about that? Like, why do you, because that's currently your Twitter name as well, as Abolish the Police. So what does that mean and why?
So I saw this really great Twitter thread that I'm happy to send you later, but essentially it was a person talking about their time when they had shadowed a police officer, that like he had known him as like a friend, like as a high schooler, and then as a police officer, he sees like how different that person has changed. And I think the problem with something like police is just that amount of power itself is enough to like corrupt someone. Like, I know it's very easy to say like, oh, but there's good police officers, and like, yes, they might be good people, but they're still in that system. They still hold that power. And I think that's kind of the reason why like I'm more towards the idea of like, we shouldn't necessarily like have police. And like, yes, the question is like, what will the alternative be? And like, I think that's still something that everyone's trying to figure out, and like no one knows completely. But I think a lot of like, there could be a lot of prevention with the way that society is right now, and like with the types of crimes we see, if we would instead take that money and put it towards the other things that were defunded, like proper education, like proper public resources, like a community. Like, I think it won't be perfect, but I think there is a lot that we can do there.
Well, I think my gripe with the whole abolish the police thing, I do think that, so for example, myself, I live in a very big city. I live in London, and a police is pretty much is like an essential service here because they're always running around doing stuff. And you know, I've had my own personal experiences with police, with like my domestic violence and things like that, and I've always found them quite helpful. And I've always found that if I feel unsafe or if there's somewhere that I need to just sit and gather my thoughts, I can always just walk into a police station, explain that I just want to sit around for a little while, and they'll just leave me alone. Um, I don't know. For me, I've always had positive experiences with police. I know that's not the case for everybody. And because it is an emergency service, my concern is that if we abolish the police, we'll see a spike in crime. And I know that that correlation may not necessarily happen, but that is my concern, especially within big cities where we have a high rate of crime already. So I do think that abolishing something like the police would have to be slow and incremental, and it wouldn't be something that would just disappear immediately. I understand also in America that the police have a very racist backstory with like the catching of slaves and things like that.
Yeah.
But that's not necessarily what it stands for today. I don't know what your take is on what I'm saying, but feel free to respond if you would like to.
Yeah, I mean, it might not necessarily be the same thing that they stand for today, but I think that power hungry feeling is still there in a different way. And I think the idea is like, yes, we would need something in that place to like, you know, making sure like our crime rates are low. But I think the idea is like, if we're eventually able to kind of abolish this idea of police and have some kind of a substitute, like some kind of a concept which is actually serving the community, and it's kind of like a do-over, like you said, like there's such a like racist history to like how police have like come to life in the United States, that it's very hard to kind of reform that now, but instead like there should be something new in place. And again, like this is all new. It's not something that's necessarily been like ever experienced before in a way almost. So I don't know exactly how that would go or what would happen, but I think it's good that we're at least having these conversations.
I think it's worth talking about for sure. I think it's worth talking about regardless of where people's opinions lie, because that's the only real way that we're going to come to a conclusion. I do think that one of the biggest problems with the United States is that it's such a big country. And if it was broken down into like a smaller states that had their own kind of governance, it could be easier to manage. Especially since like the attitudes of the North and the South are so different towards all kinds of different policies. Like Alabama last year reinstated abortion laws.
Yeah.
And you know, it's crazy. Like it's crazy. I don't
yeah.
Like they're walking backwards. But thank you for coming on to this live stream and talking about all these issues with me. There are a couple of questions from the audience if you want to address them. So Ramya A says, do you think someone who has a social media account should speak out against the racism and police brutality on their platform? Or do you think that they have the right not to?
I think you should be speaking out on it if you are someone that like is educated, or you're educating yourself enough to actually be able to make a positive difference. Like I think there are like, we all focus on like certain things on our platforms, like things that we're better educated in, things that we know better, and like if we're able to make a big difference in that, then it's great. But if our opinions are if we're very influential and people like listen to us, but our opinions are uninformed and more harmful than positive, then maybe it's not the best idea, is the way I would look at it.
So with this, because there's been a little bit of drama in our ex-Muslim community about the whole Black Lives Matter movement, because there are people who, I think the majority at the moment within our community do not support the Black Lives Matter movement, and there's a few of us that do.
Why is it that people don't support it?
So there are a couple of reasons. Some people are more focused on the numbers, so the statistics of crime in the US and that kind of stuff. And we'll get into that because there are a couple of comments about that as well. And also, I think that quite a few members of our community are quite conservative and I don't want to say right-wing, but they have conservative ideals. So they kind of lean on those.
Got it.
And it's that, I think that it's this sort of groupthink that sometimes makes it difficult to disagree. And I mean, I've always kind of been a contrarian with whichever community I've been in. So I like, even if I don't necessarily believe in the things that I'm saying, I will ask questions opposite to what I believe, just to understand the topic in a more broad sense. And I honestly think that's the only way we come to like good informed conclusions, is if we have both sides talking. Like, for example, if you went ahead with your abolish the police and then made everyone believe it, it wouldn't necessarily work well if you didn't have people saying, well, how else are we gonna, you know, like it's, I think it's, disagreeing is something that is very, very helpful to human beings as a community, as a society, because we get to explore an issue on levels that we wouldn't be able to if we just agreed with the first thing that popped into our brains. And it's necessary to disagree, and it's necessary to have dissenters and you know, people who'll shout and scream over each other. But it's also really, really important to have those dialogues and acknowledge all of the points that exist. So we actually do have, and to also say that I do think that someone who has a following has a responsibility to the people who are following them. And like, as much as I am very much in the libertarian kind of place, I understand that you can do whatever you want. I think that to an extent, when you have such a big following that, you know, listen to you and acknowledge what you say, you have a responsibility to be true to them in what you think is right. And if you have an opinion on something, you should say it without, you know, excuses and you know, skipping around the subject. And I just think the world would just run a lot smoother if people just said what they meant and meant what they said.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just going to say, like, one thing that I would add to that is I agree. And I think that's especially the case if like, so I guess nowadays on social media, like there's kind of a lot of like, when you're talking about someone with a following, there's a lot of like different levels. And I would say, especially when you're looking at celebrities and their platforms, if you have profited off of a certain like issue or a certain topic, then you'd like, even more so than anyone else with like a lot of followers, if you've profited off of that, you definitely have a responsibility to do so then.
Yes, because at that point it's your job.
Like, exactly, like you've made money off of it. So
so we have a comment here. So you have to comprehend when we talk about such things. So in terms of BLM, we must refer to the statistics. So the statistics is something that I've seen thrown around a lot with Black crime rates in the US, as you know, within the context of them being a minority, and then that, you know, it's kind of a way to say that explains the level of brutality that Black people face in the US. What would you say to that? Because I don't necessarily, like, I don't hail statistics as the best way to look at something, because that there are certain things that can be flawed within statistics. Like, for example, if you look at rape cases and rape statistics, we kind of acknowledge that rape will be underreported because women don't like talking about it, and there's a stigma around rape. And my issue with the reporting of police brutality and the recording of it, and then also the crime rates within the US. So the gripes that I have about it, if I can just lay all my thoughts out, is that I think that crime in Black communities within the US could be because of the scrutiny around them. It could be like, we don't know which causes what. Is it because of the profiling and the scrutiny that the police have with the Black community that the Black community acts out, or is it because they are more criminal that the police are profiling them? Which causes which? I think it's difficult to say. The other thing is that, is the crime rate higher in Black communities because they are disenfranchised and they don't have as many opportunities? And is there something we need to do about that? In terms of brutality, obviously with police brutality cases, not everyone dies from it, and it's not always recorded, you know, on a phone or that kind of thing. And then even if it does happen and it someone, you know, survives from a case of police brutality, what is the rate of reporting? Like, is it always going to be reported? Because there's clearly a power dynamic there. So I don't know if I've covered all of the points, but please feel free to comment on it as well. And that's my problem with just relying on statistics for your information.
Yeah, I think statistics could be considered, but I definitely wouldn't rely on just that, because if there's anything that I've learned as I'm like growing up and like learning more about all these topics, is statistics and history textbooks are two things that will always be biased by the way that the person who like creates them or reports them wants you to think. So I don't think they're very like, they're not unbiased most of the time. And I think that makes it very hard, because you only end up seeing what the police want you to see. Or if you're looking at like a textbook, like you'll see what the majority wants you to see. So I don't think that it's a very good way of looking at something.
Yeah, I think that, like, as someone who is quite artsy and relies on art to tell me something, I do value, you know, anecdotes and stories and things like that. And I think that that is something that is undervalued when we look at movements. But, you know, stories, case studies, anecdotes are the crux of a lot of different movements. I think that an argument can be made for the Me Too movement, an argument can be made for, you know, the ex-Muslim movement, in that so much of the movement is based on anecdotal stuff, because sometimes I can't say that word, statistics do not exist. And they exist because people in that environment are severely persecuted. And it I don't know. It just doesn't ring true to me that you only look at the numbers and then hail those as facts. I don't like that. There is we have another question. If we abolish the police, what alternative would you suggest? We kind of touched this before, but do you have any ideas on what kind of alternatives you would suggest?
Again, like, I don't have specific ideas, but I think it would just be putting that money back into like reforming the community and educating the community, and like more resources. Like one of the things that you hear a lot is when police are called to a house for a mental health situation, and like that's just, police are not even trained to be doing that. So if we're putting more money and like time towards mental health professionals, educating people on safety, consent, those kinds of things, I think that would be like a better alternative.
That's fair enough. I think you have a more optimistic view on people than I do.
Yeah.
I'm very pessimistic about people.
So am I. I'm trying to get better with that.
I think that a level of pessimism is probably healthy, because, you know, given our history and the way that we've, you know, treated groups of people in the past, it's probably healthy to have a level of pessimism. I mean, the kind of world that you describe is very, very utopic. It also sounds very freeing. But
I mean, that would have its own issues. If we ever achieve that, it'll come with a new set of issues.
But I mean, it's always fun, first of all, to talk about it, and it's also good to explore these ideas. And also within, so if we look at riot dynamics and riot ideologies within the radical ideology, which is an ideology that I fall into, which is more liberal, more lefty, there is this idea of the rights of man, and that man is, you know, has a responsibility to himself, and things like that. I say himself, we mean ourselves. But you know, from a more conservative perspective, they do view like revolution as something more utopic, and something they're slightly more pessimistic about it. And I think that you don't have to be leaning one side or the other to you kind of have to hear both sides. And I think that that is really, really important at the end of the day. There is a question for me. Why are all ex-Muslims jumping on liberal nonsense? I can't understand that. Well, first of all, I am a liberal. That's where I'm going to lean. You know, I'm center left. I'm very leaning left. So I, you know, as someone who is working class, as someone who's a woman, you know, I would prefer being more liberal and more egalitarian and things like that. But it's actually quite surprising that a lot of ex-Muslims do align more with a conservative narrative, not necessarily like super, super right wing, but like center right or right wing. so they do fall that way mostly. And if you look at the Twitter feed right now, most ex-Muslims at the moment are not supporting BLM, and it's quite shocking to me as someone who, you know, we fight for the rights of minorities like ourselves, ex-Muslims in other countries, all of the time, because we hear the stories that they go through. We see what the government does to them, the different governments that exist, and to me it just seems very counterproductive to not also fight for this cause. To move on, are we past the point of being able to reform the police, and is that why Sai is saying that we should abolish them? Is that what you believe?
Kind of. I mean, like I said, I think there's opportunity for some kind of a new concept to be put in that place. But like personally, just from what we've, at least, you know, I can't speak for the United Kingdom, but in the United States, it's like just the history of it all is just so brutal. Like just the way that police, the way that the like prison system is, like all of that is just, it's almost past a point of reform, at least in my opinion. But I also think the other issue with the United States is, you touched on this earlier, is it varies so much state to state. Yes. Like the way California is so different from the way Mississippi is. Like there's so many like things to like factor in when you talk about things like that.
Yeah, I think that the US doesn't just have like a police problem, they have a lot of problems across the board, and it varies from state to state. And I think that Canada's managed to do it quite well. I think that Canada runs quite smoothly, but I think the US, there's too many sort of disagreeing voices. And I don't like making the comparison between America and Germany, like Nazi Germany a lot. But one of the reasons why during like around World War II, people voted for more extreme parties was because there was such a discontent among loads of different people. And also they had a different system of voting, in that they didn't have like the first past the post type of voting. They had proportional representation. So radical groups had a higher rate, like they had a higher chance of gaining popularity very, very quickly. So it's this like a lot of conflicting voices within the US that makes me concerned about their politics. Again, I try to color myself as very apolitical because I don't know enough about politics, but it is scary. So we have another question from Ramya A. Do you have a YouTube channel or social media we can follow?
I do not have a YouTube channel, but I have Twitter and Instagram that people can follow. It's
you should get a YouTube channel.
I should. Maybe I've just been scared too, honestly, but maybe I should.
It's. I mean, you're good at talking, so why not?
Well, thank you. Maybe that's the next step. But yeah, for now, I mean, if people want to follow me, if you want to like send my Twitter somehow, or if you want me to just put it in the chat.
Yeah, I will. I will link your @ in the chat. But it's been a wonderful time talking to you, because it's not often that I get to talk to somebody who, you know, I just don't know too much about. Usually I just get my friends on here and we'll just have a laugh, have some kiki, and just that kind of thing. But so this is your Twitter handle. There is another question. Do you think that conservatism of some ex-Muslims has anything to do with the after effects of Islam? I don't know. I think that a lot of, and again, like I don't want to make any assumptions, and I don't want to like accuse anyone of anything, because it would not be my place to do that. But I do think that a lot of support that we get in terms of our movement does come from the conservative right. And I think it's a very dangerous kind of dance to flirt with that. I do not agree with a lot of tenets that exist in conservatism. I do not value property as much as conservatism seems to dictate. I do value people, and that is a left idea. That is a very liberal idea. So I don't know. I do also think that Islam is a very conservative religion, and if you come from that, you kind of relate more to conservative policies. So that might be the reason for that, but I don't know. I don't know if you have any comment on that side yourself, or You wouldn't know.
Yeah, no.
It's all good. But thank you for coming on, and thank you for having this conversation with me. I've definitely, like, I do feel like every time I bring somebody on, I do feel like I learn something and I have something to think about afterwards. And like, I just like these live streams, while I do have them so that I can talk to people, I do also kind of do them for myself because I know that I don't know everything, and I want to know more. So yeah, it's been a good time, and thank you for, you know, agreeing to join me, and I hope you've had a good time as well.
Yeah, I had a great time. And like also, you know, it's been very cool for me because I don't know like a lot of like Britain politics and like the way things work there. So like also like anytime you see like resources or articles from like the United Kingdom that you think I would learn from, please feel free to send them my way.
I don't know anything about British politics. It's so messy right now.
It's
like
so confusing.
I'm not even joking, Sai. Like, I have blacked out the last like 5 years of British politics since like the Brexit discussion started because it's too much. I I swear I just can't handle it. Like, we've had so many prime ministers in the last few years that I can't keep up with them. It's like a drama at this point, and I really don't like it when politics becomes like drama, because that's what's happened in the US right now with the Trump family, and it's, I don't know. I think that it makes us take the politics less seriously. I'm, you know, responsible for that as well, and we should take it more seriously because it affects all of us. But unfortunately, it just becomes so convoluted and so ridiculous that we don't know what's going on. But yeah, I mean, I'll do my best. But it's been lovely having you, and I you know, I hope to talk to you in future. And I'm glad that you had a good time.
Yeah, have a great day. Stay safe in this time. I know things are still scary out there.
Yes, they are. But we're going to close out the live stream. Thank you for everyone who joined us. Please do remember to like, share, and subscribe, and follow Sai. She has some great content, and you know, keep up with Women's Republic as well. It's a pretty cool magazine. But yeah, I'll see everybody later, and
Bye.
Bye.